I love that last line of the first reading that we heard tonight. Who are these people? We're asked, who are these people in the white robes? And the answer is, they are the ones who survived the tribulations. There they are. They made it through. If you listen to the list of qualities that these people have, you know that their life was no bowl of cherries. If you just paid attention to each of the things just shared in that reading, these are the qualities of the people we're talking about. They are poor, they are sad, they're meek, they're frustrated, they're wronged, they are restrained, they bite their tongue, they are misjudged, and they are disrespected. It's very clear in hearing these readings that you do not become a saint by avoiding hardship. To become a saint, you have to face your hardship and move through it. You don't become a saint by avoiding things. You become a saint by overcoming them. When we call someone a saint, this is the basic thing we're saying. A saint is anyone who ended their journey in the arms of God. If at the end of your journey you are in the arms of God, you are a saint. If you are a canonized saint, one of those that we talk about, like Mary and Patrick and all the other canonized saints, what that means is the way you got to the arms of God is worth everybody paying attention to. This is a life story to study. That's what a canonized saint is. That's why we have books of saints' lives. They're not any different than the other saints who are in the arms of God at the end of their life. But they are the ones that we pay special attention to because there's a lot to learn by studying their life. The pattern of a saint's life is a lot like the pattern of our life. Here's how it goes. Things are humming along, okay, and then you hit a bump in the road, and then sometimes it gets better, but sometimes it doesn't, it gets worse. And then you start worrying, what if this gets even worse? And then sometimes it does. And sometimes you say, God forbid this ever happen. And that very thing we said, God forbid, it happens. I'm looking out, and there are some people here tonight who the thing that they said God forbid to wound up happening. So, what do we do with such a scary pattern? When we hit a bump in the road, things might get better, but they might not. What we're looking to be assured of tonight is that if we keep going in the right direction, we are going to end in the arms of God. No matter how bumpy the road there is, no matter how much it is a roller coaster, no matter how high the highs are or how low the lows are, if we end in the arms of God, then this is a joyful story. If this ends with us, with God, looking back saying, whew, that was a close one, then it's a happy story. Anything else would be a tragedy. One of the things we see by looking at the lives of those saints that are canonized is how hard their lives were. I could have taken just about any example, but you know the one I decided to take tonight? Joan of Arc. Oh my goodness. If you take just a glance at her life, it's unbelievable. Her highs were so high. Her highs started early. She was a teenager. Imagine this. In the 1400s, a teenager, a female, put in charge of this big French army. She won battle after battle as the general of an army, as a 14-year-old girl. Can you imagine how high that high was? Well, then she was captured by the enemy. She was imprisoned for a year, and at the end of being imprisoned, she was put on trial. She was accused of being a witch and a heretic, and she was found guilty. And they burned her alive at the stake at age 19. 20 years later, they launched an investigation into her story and decided she was totally innocent. In 1920, they canonized her a saint. She went from being called a heretic to a saint. She went from being the general of an army to being burned as a criminal. And she did it all by the time she was 19. But she ended her life in the arms of God. So her story might have sounded scary if you didn't know how it ended. But when you end your story like that, the whole thing becomes amazing. That's our pattern in life too. So many of us have been through fire and have found our way to the other side. Last week, I did a burial in our cemetery for Chet Woodward. You may know that name. Some Coxsackians will know that family name. Chet grew up in Philadelphia. He wasn't from here, but his family was, and Chet used to spend every summer up here, and he loved Coxsackie. He had family in town, obviously, and cousins who go to our church, and I asked his sister's permission to share this story tonight because I thought it was so moving. Chet was always a sensitive soul, such a good boy growing up, and everyone loved him. When he came to Coxsackie for the summer, everybody was delighted. Such a sensitive, kind boy with amazing musical gifts. So much so that when he grew up, he went on the road and made his living as a musician. He played in cover bands for like the Grateful Dead, and would do all sorts of playing out at festivals and at events and venues. The family was very proud of him, but they were also worried because he was incredibly sensitive. And they wondered sometimes if his sensitivity might have actually been an indication that he struggled a little bit with mental illness. And he developed a drinking problem. And when his parents died and chose to be buried here in our cemetery, they said to their daughters, his older sisters, "Please take care of Chet. He needs a watchful eye." But he didn't make it easy because he's a musician on the road. And he wound up moving to El Paso, Texas, so far from where his sisters lived. And they would check in on him as much as they could. But they always worried. And they got some hints that things weren't so good. Whenever they would want to visit him, he would say, no, I see this place all the time. And instead of spending money on visiting, why don't you send me a plane ticket and I can come home? And when he did, they would ask some questions and they would get the sense that maybe he didn't always have a place to live. And that maybe he was kind of coming in and out of some homelessness. And they started worrying that maybe he wasn't as safe as they thought he was. And they said things like, God forbid anything ever happened to him. On September 18th this year, they got a call from the El Paso police. He had been walking home from a job that he had, and he had cash on him, and somebody had watched him leave, and they robbed him at knife point. And in the skirmish, they stabbed him to death. The sisters said, this is exactly what we feared our whole life. Our beloved brother. They were so heartsick. A friend of his invited them to come down for the memorial service, and when they asked where the memorial service would be, they were told it would be in a bar. So they went down, they got some affairs in order and went to El Paso, and when they walked in the bar where his memorial service was held, his sister Margot told me it was like walking into a cathedral. The faces of the people in that bar lit up when they saw us walking in. And they ran to us and they said, we loved Chet so much. He was our angel. We loved him. And they had a beautiful service in that bar. And it was filled with stories of his goodness and the good deeds that crowned his life. And people had given the sisters letters that they had prepared ahead of time so that they would be able to say the story just exactly right, explaining the kind things he did and the money he gave away when he didn't have any and the trips he made with people who were afraid to drive alone. They said they had never walked into a scene of such love in all of their life. They said that everybody in there felt like an angel to them, and they realized that they understood their brother's life so differently now. It wasn't the tragedy that they thought it was. They brought his ashes home to Coxsackie, and on Saturday we gathered in our cemetery with his cousins, and they told beautiful stories about his life. And we played Amazing Grace, and we took his ashes and we buried them right next to his parents on one side, and right next to Father Patrick Woodward on the other side, his uncle, who was the very first priest ever to be born and raised in Coxsackie, New York. You see, when you end your life in the arms of God, the whole story can be redeemed. Everything can be beautiful when it ends like that. Being a canonized saint means your life is worthy of studying, and a lot of our lives are never going to be at that level. But all of us are called to end our lives in the arms of God. What a beautiful day to celebrate the direction that we're heading.